All right, Sarah, thanks so much for doing this. My first question that I have for you is tell the audience, a little bit about yourself and how you started in the mental health community.
Sure. Yeah, of course. Thank you for having me. Yeah, I'm a licensed mental health counselor. I see individuals and couples based out of New York and Florida. I work with a lot of individuals who are processing childhood trauma, and then couples who are kind of looking at and struggling with big life decisions, or just kind of difficulty getting on the same page. And then I also, for about 2 years, have been working with seasoned career counselor Nancy Layton, and I'm working towards my career counseling certification with her as well. And in both kind of camps, in both practices, my mental health counseling work and my career counseling work, I work with a lot of neurodivergent individuals. So, of course, people who have ADHD or are on the autism spectrum, and then also just kind of individuals who kind of deal with similar symptoms, similar challenges, which I see come up a lot in my mental health counseling work, kind of with that couple communication, and then in the workplace as well.
Yeah, let's talk about those two camps. What are you doing in those two areas?
Yeah. Well, I heard it described once, and I really liked this, that being neurodivergent is a bit like being left-handed because we live in a right-handed world. So there's nothing wrong per se with having ADHD or being on the autism spectrum, except for the fact that we live in a world that is really made for, designed by, and for neurotypical people. So if we think about ADHD and ASD, it's just a processing disorder, which means that your brain processes information differently than a neurotypical brain processes information. The challenge there, though, is that people are expecting you to act, they're expecting you to interact with other people as if you're a neurotypical person. So that obviously leads to a lot of challenges, both in couples, both just in personal life, and then in the workforce as well. It's all kind of relational where I really see it pop up.
hmm And so, what are some of the challenges that people with ADHD or on the autism spectrum face, when dealing with things like, their personal lives, the workforce, and other areas?
Yeah. I don't love the term attention deficit disorder because it implies that people with ADHD struggle with attention, or it implies they have a deficit or a lack of attention, which is absolutely not true. I think a better way to think about it is if we think about attention as kind of a faucet or a tap, and they're interest based. So, what that means is when someone with ADHD has something that they're really interested in, that faucet opens full force, that attention comes in very strongly, and they can actually hyper focus, which is kind of what neurotypical people might think of as flow. When you kind of reach a flow state, you're so present and in what you're doing. But ADHD people can do this kind of to the max, and they can lose track of time. But they can get a lot done in a short amount of time. But then the other side of that is that if they are tasked with doing something that they're not interested in, it's really hard to squeeze that attention out of that faucet. They're getting little drops and trying to get more out of it. So that's somewhere that I think they run into a lot of issues in the workforce, and even in couples when we're thinking about domestic life and getting things done at home. I see a lot of couples run into this problem where there's kind of this assumption that someone who has ADHD might be lazy or have a hard time accomplishing simple tasks, when really it's more of this interest-based problem. They're potentially have a task in front of them that doesn't spark that interest, and then it's really hard for them to kind of squeeze that enough attention out to complete it start to finish. And without understanding there, without support, without tools, they're kind of left floundering. And then again, it can be kind of assumed that they're lazy, or lack attention. And then on the other side, I see a lot of clients on the autism spectrum who oftentimes report that they get feedback that there isn't enough emotion in their voice, and it turns people off. So I work really hard with my clients who might experience ASD during interviews and things like that, where I think that when neurotypical people interact with them and they come off maybe a little monotone or a little less emotion in their voice, it can lead neurotypical people to draw back from them a little bit or not really maybe trust them right off the bat, which is ill-founded. There's no reason for that, but they experience this in kind of their relationships. So sometimes it means coaching a client to start off an interview by saying, hey, I just want to let you know that in new environments, sometimes I might come off a little reserved or even a little robotic. I want to let you know that as time goes on, I warm up and I loosen up, but I am aware of that. So sometimes getting kind of in front of it can bring neurotypical people's defenses down a little bit, and allow them to kind of give them a chance to have a real conversation.
So let's dive into the sort of the therapy session that you have with these clients. You know, what sorts of modalities do you use to sort of help them with, struggles that they're going through?
I think that there's some study floating around out there that says that like 97% of neurotypical people think that it is a terrible thing to have ADHD or ASD. Um, and that can have a lot of effects, obviously, in our society in the long run, downstream. And so oftentimes when these clients get to me, they're pretty beaten down. They're struggling a lot, I find, with self-esteem. And so I always think that sort of working into my work with clients, a strength-based modality is so helpful because oftentimes these clients have never heard kind of a strengths-based perspective on what they're dealing with. They've never heard the ways that it actually can be really beneficial to them and their work. They've never heard the ways that they're probably exhausted by trying to fit into a neurotypical world, but that if they can change their world a bit, or change the way that they're approaching their work, they can actually bring really unique perspective and unique tools to their teams, or to their relationships, whether that's personal or again in the workforce. So I always think that a strength-based approach, a strength-based modality is so helpful, just to kind of combat some of that oftentimes like kind of purely negative perspective that those clients have gotten along the way.
Mm-hmm. So tell me a little bit about the work that you're doing with this psychologist. What's her name again?
Nancy Layton.
Tell me a little bit about your work with Dr. Layton. What's that all about?
Yeah, so Nancy Layton is a licensed mental health counselor as well and a certified career counselor. And she's been doing this work for quite a long time. But basically, she helps clients along the road in their career. So what that means is that clients come to us at all different stages in their career, whether they're looking at the onset of their career, very early on, they're looking to figure out what they want to do, whether they're a bit into their career and want to change careers, or whether they're struggling with some roadblock at work, getting some promotion, negotiating a salary, that kind of thing. So we work one-on-one individually with those clients and meet them where they're at, and kind of assess what is their individual struggle, what are they looking for. So if a client is coming to us at kind of the onset of their career, we might do some assessments. We might help them figure out what are their strengths, what are their interests, what is their narrative about themselves, and how does that fit into their work, or how could it fit into their work. or if it's a bit further on in their career, are they struggling with a manager? Is there some reason that they're feeling blocked in getting ahead or getting what they actually want out of their career? Kind of helping them break down and maybe change perspectives a little bit or get a new perspective on what their roadblocks might be, whether that's personal or whether that's relationally.
Mm-hmm. So how do you like what sorts of things have you learned as a mental health professional that you sort of like in your work with people with ADHD, what have you learned?
Oh man, I think what I really just learned is that we're all so unique. Um, and I guess what I mean by that is you can't assume anything about anyone. So even if somebody comes to me and they say, I have ADHD or I'm on the spectrum, or even if they have not been diagnosed, but I can sort of sense that they're having similar challenges in some way, it is never a one size fits all approach. Everyone is so unique. So I can have some ideas about, I've seen these things work before, these tools, or, I can offer some perspective, but you really, really have to let people tell you who they are. You really have to give everyone a chance to express their own story, their own perspective, their own challenges. People are just so incredibly, in so many ways, they're so unique. They have such a unique perspective, unique challenges. So I think the biggest thing that I've learned is that we can have frameworks and we can have tools to try, but the biggest thing is you have to actively listen and you have to let people tell you who they are.
Mm-hmm. And what do you still hope to learn as a mental health counselor? Is there anything that you want to check off your bucket list?
That's a great question. That's a great question. I think I want to continue to democratize this work a bit more in the future. I think that there is still so much stigma around neurodivergence. There's so much stigma, especially still in the autism spectrum community. I think we've made some headway in the ADHD community. But I still say to clients, they'll ask me, should I disclose to my boss if I have ADHD or ASD? And I still find myself hesitating with encouraging clients to do that. I always say to clients, no one's entitled to your vulnerability. So you can say, you might notice this about me, or I might, need this tool, but we haven't really gotten to a place yet where it feels like we're safe to disclose kind of what we're dealing with. And so I really hope that through more conversations, especially in like the way that we're doing it now, we can democratize some of this information a bit more, which helps to break down those stigmas. So yeah, I think more democratization of kind of going out and talking about these things, and maybe eventually even talking to more large groups, versus more of that one-on-one work, which I absolutely love, but can sometimes feel limiting as well.
Mm-hmm. My last question is for those, who are wanting to enter the mental health field and like target, the ADHD population, what sorts of tools, advice would you give them to sort of get them prepared to really deal with handle clients, with those with ADHD?
Yeah. Oof. I would say, kind of circling back a little bit again, really actively talking to and listening to people with a wide array of experiences who have ADHD and who potentially are on the autism spectrum. I think I would say that, we don't spend a lot of time on that in school. There isn't a lot of time spent, I think, for how many people in our society really do process this way. It kind of gets thrown into the same class as and all of the diagnoses. But I think that a lot more people in our society than we realize process information the way people who have ADHD or ASD process information. And so I think that we have to be on the lookout for it a bit more than we are, just so that we can change our approach a bit to the way that that person processes information versus seeing it as a big red flag or a deficit. I think we have to be on the lookout. So I think just being aware of what are the signs, what are the processing signs. So a lot of people who have ADHD experience rejection sensitivity dysphoria, which means that their brain has a really strong reaction to the feeling of rejection. They experience it a lot closer to physical pain than a lot of neuro individuals or neurotypical individuals. So something like the job search process can be really difficult for them because it's just oftentimes rejection after rejection after rejection until you kind of get that one yes. So if you have a client in front of you who is having a really large reaction to rejection and is wanting to distance themselves from that, that's always something that cues me in or just makes me take pause, right? Everyone's, unique again, and you have to look out for a lot more than that, but that's always a moment that I take pause, or also justice sensitivity. So a lot of ADHD individuals, because their brains are taking in so much information at once and categorizing it all of the time, they see injustice really clearly, because they're always comparing and contrasting data inside their brain. So if I have a client who I can tell is kind of always pointing out what's fair, what's not fair, that's another thing that's going to cue me in a little bit and just make my ear perk up and make me, want to wonder and look out for other signs, right? So I think we have to be aware of what are some of those emotional tells about how someone processes information, because I think that there is probably a bit more of it out there than we necessarily realize at this time.
Mm-hmm. All right.